Hi, I'm here to talk about the greatest change of my life. It was while I was going through divorce at age 38. I was a housewife and mother with no career, no means of support, and I was totally devastated. And I went to a therapist who told me the mind controls all. Yogis can walk on nails, they can regulate their body temperature, and it's up to us to decide. And when I left, I decided I was going to be happy rather than sad. So I unconsciously closed off all my feelings and went into a very high altered state. I started experiencing ESP and mental telepathy. I'd know if someone was looking at me from behind on a train or if somebody called. I hadn't spoken to them in 6 months. Thoughts started coming day and night. I felt like I went into a very high guru state. However, I wasn't sleeping and eating. I lost 30 pounds in 2 weeks, and I was sleeping maybe an hour a night trying to find how you can have a happy, permanent relationship. And one day, just totally overwhelmed with exhaustion and nonstop thought, I had a meltdown, and I started crying and screaming with these animalistic sounds coming out of me. And I ran into my bedroom. My knees went down to the floor, and my hands went over the bed in prayer-like fashion, and I automatically screamed, "God help me." And I lay down in bed and felt this incredible pins and needles radiance surround me. And then all of a sudden it entered into me. And I remembered thinking, this is the feeling of love without having someone to love. This is unconditional love, and it has nothing to do with what we do. It's what we receive. And it took me over 25 years to actually figure out what I was doing that created that mystical experience and what we need to do now. And bottom line, I learned how to help other people truly open their hearts to love and live with meaning and purpose.
On November 22nd, 1982, my mother died very suddenly. I'm the youngest in my family, and the youngest by 7 years, and the only of my 3 siblings who was still living at home. That was a very significant day to lose my mother so suddenly. One of my sisters was here with her family already, and by the end of the night, all my siblings, my brother and my other sister, had arrived, and we were all together. It was a very difficult day, very confusing. And by the end of the night, when all were trying to go to sleep, my siblings each went with their families, with their young children. My father was in his bed alone, and I was in my bed alone, and that didn't feel right. I so wanted to climb into bed with my father, who I loved so dearly. That didn't feel right either, though. I was the baby of the family. I didn't want everyone to think of me as the baby. And I guess incest taboo, I couldn't climb into bed with my father. So I took my pillow and my blanket, and I lied on his floor, and I tried to go to sleep. That still didn't work for me. And I went back into my room and into my bed by myself, feeling very lost and very distraught, very sad. And I felt something touch me. First I heard my name. I heard my name very softly, and I felt something touch me from the top of my head all the way down my body. And I fell asleep like that. People have asked me what that is, what that was. I don't really know. It doesn't really matter. It was a connection. It was a connection, a deep connection, and it reminds me that I am connected to something larger outside of myself.
I think my spiritual journey began when I was a kid, maybe 7 or 8, when my parents were in a rather powerful confrontation, pretty regularly, being a lot of animosity. And it led to some togetherness and separations. And I thought that I was being in the middle. I'm not sure that was really the case, but at least for a kid's perception, I had the impression that I was the cause of their animosity. And I felt very bad about it. And I also thought, well, maybe life isn't worth living, because if I'm in the middle of all this animosity, each seemed to want me to be on their side. Difficult position for a tender young mind. And instead of deciding that it would be best to end my life with this fantasy that they will be looking over my grave after I'm dead and be saying, we're so sorry that we brought this difficulty upon you, of course, which is a child's fantasy, I decided instead that that's where my spiritual life began. I decided to get interested in what can I do to save them. So I decided I joined the Rosicrucians as a kid. I used to get their literature. I started reading about hypnosis and what we can do to understand ourselves and so on. I was rather precocious in that sense. And I don't know that I was able to save them, because they eventually did get a divorce and the animosity continued. But I think it was more helpful than anything in saving myself. That's what was most useful. And then what happened is I had, because I was interested in what I could do to be useful to other people and felt pretty good about myself, I was very fortunate that in my professional training I had a mentor Jerome Frank, who was at that time the world authority on the psychological issues of war and peace. And so that got me even more interested. And then I had the marvelous privilege of listening to the journey to well-being of, I would say, probably thousands of individuals, because I did a lot of group work in my practice. And I had that opportunity, and I learned that probably the most important skill that any of us can learn is to like ourselves. People who like themselves start to love themselves. And so that's where I've come to now, that I think the most important basic skill is the skill of learning to love ourselves. And the two most important skills, the secret skills that I try to share now with other people, most people don't know these skills, but the first one is what I call emotional self-endorsement, to learn to emotionally, really enthusiastically love themselves. Most people don't do that. They enthusiastically love others. They know how to talk to a dog to get the dog's tail to wag. They know how to talk to a baby. They know how to cheer at an athletic event. But they don't know how to look in the mirror and say, I am such a hot sketch, to themselves. So and the second skill I've learned is when we learn to do our reasonable best, an input measure, rather than most people depend on an outcome measure. Did it come out okay? So that's how I developed my spiritual life, and I'm very happy that I really like myself, and I'm happy to share that with others.